Hello everyone, I'm Andrea from Andrea Flipping Unique. Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, thanks for joining. You might have caught a glimpse of this nightstand in my previous video, and that's because I was using it as a work surface. But I found it at Goodwill and I immediately fell in love with it because it is mid-century modern and it's also made by Harmony House. There were a few minor issues with the veneer and the finish itself wasn't the best looking, but overall it was a really solid piece with a lot of potential, and for $4.99 I couldn't pass it up. So continue watching this video to see how I gave this tiny nightstand a huge makeover. I'm going to be starting off this video a little bit differently than I normally do, but it's for a very good reason. I had a subscriber leave me a comment saying that my first step in refinishing furniture should not be cleaning, but instead it should be testing for lead because that is the most important thing. And I am here to say that they are 1,000% correct. I am also here to say that I do test my pieces for lead. I have just never filmed it and have rarely ever discussed it, and that is because if a piece does have lead, I will not work on it. Removing lead paint and lead finishes can be extremely hazardous to your health if not done properly. You need to make sure that the finishes are wet, so either removing them by wet sanding or using a special chemical stripper, and of course wearing all of the proper PPE. So even though there are safe ways to removing lead finishes, it's just something that I personally don't want to mess with. But I also know I would be doing a huge disservice, especially to newer refinishers, by not discussing this in my future videos. So moving forward, I am going to be trying my absolute hardest to remember to film myself when doing these lead tests, and definitely be putting a disclaimer on the screen stating that the piece that I'm working on is lead free, and to make sure that you are testing your pieces as well. Now, I didn't see this comment until I was halfway done with this piece. However, I did have one section that I did not sand because I was going to be removing it anyway. So I took that as a sign and decided this would be the perfect opportunity to show you what I do when I do a lead test, and to also show you what it looks like if you were to ever get a positive lead test. So these are the testing swabs that I use, and they just look like giant Q-tips. But what you want to do is take one and submerge it in water till the tip turns a mustard yellow color, shake off any excess water, and then immediately rub it onto your piece. On the container itself, there is a color scale, and it goes from that orange mustard color all the way up to a deep magenta. And if any lead was present, the tip of that swab would turn magenta, and you can see on this one, it stayed the orange color. I do occasionally make stained glass pieces and had some lead solder on hand, so I thought I would take the opportunity to show you what would happen if lead was present and how that tip changes to that magenta color. This is the swab when held up against that color scale on the container, so you can clearly see it's in that lead range color. And then these are the two swabs next to each other so that you can get an idea of what to look for when you're doing your own lead testing. If my regular subscribers guessed that the next thing that I did was remove the finish with my carbide scraper, you would actually be incorrect. I actually ended up changing the filters on my mask because it had been a hot minute and I could definitely tell that they weren't working as efficiently. So if it's been a hot minute since you've changed your filters, here is your friendly reminder to go do so. Okay, now back to removing the finish. The condition definitely wasn't the worst I've ever seen, but it was super cloudy and had yellowed over time, and it was covering up this gorgeous walnut veneer that was underneath. After scraping as much of the finish off as I could, I went back in with my orbital sander and 120 grit sandpaper to remove all of the rest. To make it easier on myself to remove all of that finish in the bottom cubby, I ended up carefully taking off the back panel using my hammer and a painter's tool. I couldn't use my scraper very well on the inside, so I did end up using my sander, but I periodically checked for any buildup on my sandpaper so that I wasn't getting any swirl marks. You can really start to see here just how much that finish was covering up that walnut. So I personally don't like furniture that goes all the way to the ground and you can't see underneath it. So I knew with this nightstand that I either wanted to add new legs or a new base. In order to get the look that I was going for, I needed to remove the very bottom of this, and I started off by removing this front panel. I then needed to cut off the sides, and I started off by laying some painter's tape down right where I was going to cut. That way the veneer was less likely to splinter. I then measured and marked right where my cut line was going to be. I cut it off by first using my circular saw, and then I had to move to my jigsaw because the circular saw wouldn't fit over this little wood ledge. I did have a few pieces of veneer come off when I was cutting the sides, and there were a few pieces missing prior to me buying this piece, so I ended up mixing up some wood epoxy putty and filling all of those in. This isn't a necessary step by any means, but I do like to tint my wood epoxy putty using my concentrated stain tints from Refinish. It just makes it a lot easier for me to do all of my color matching. Oh, shoot. I originally had planned out to build a base for this, but I ended up not having enough wood for my side skirts and I didn't want to go to the store to get more, so I ended up making some legs instead. I didn't want them to be traditional legs that just attached at the bottom. I also wanted them to come up onto the side. I started out by making a template out of some scrap wood that I had, and I'll be using this template to trace out all of my legs on the wood. I started out by marking for the overall height of the leg, which was going to be 5 inches, and then I started marking where the nightstand was going to be sitting on the leg, and that was going to be 3 inches. So that leaves 2 inches for the part that's going to be extending up on the side, but it will start to make more sense once you see it drawn out. I wanted these legs to be angled, so I marked from the very top to the very bottom and made a line that angled out. I also wanted the portion that went onto the nightstand to be about 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch, so I took that into consideration when marking this line. I then drew out the rest of the leg like I do with all of the other bases that I've made and just kind of played around with different angles and curves, and I also took into consideration the part that goes underneath the nightstand. That also needed to be about 1/2 inch thick. So hopefully as you see me drawing it out, it kind of makes a little bit more sense as to what I'm trying to explain. But if you do have any questions, you can reach out to me on my Instagram and DM me there. After everything was looking the way I wanted it to, I then went and took the template and cut it out on my bandsaw and then traced it onto the wood that I was going to be using. When you're tracing your legs out, make sure that the grain is going vertically because that's going to be your strongest direction for support. I am using a 3/4 inch oak board for these legs, but I would suggest if you're going to be making these for a dresser to definitely be using something thicker. After they were all traced out, I did use a mixture of both my miter saw and my bandsaw to cut them out. I didn't film it, but I also used my router to round off the edges, and I did so on this edge and this edge, front and back. Before I could attach them, I had to make sure that there was something to attach them to, so I had to add some supports to the bottom of the nightstand. To attach them, I started out by making a pilot hole, and then I went back and made a countersink hole so that my screws wouldn't show. I also ended up adding 2 screw holes per leg. After I had my legs all done, I then went back in with 120 grit sandpaper and sanded down all of that wood epoxy putty. After all of that was done, I then went back in and sanded the whole entire thing with 150 grit and 180 grit sandpaper to get ready for stain. For stain, I ended up using Royal Walnut from We Refinish. I didn't do the concentrate this time because I had just enough of the premix to use on this nightstand and I wanted to use it up. After the stain had dried, I applied 2 coats of Behr's water-based polyurethane and satin. After the top coat had dried, I went back in with my furniture repair paste and color matched any veneer repairs I had made. These 2 front pieces were different wood from the veneer, so I had to tone them. I ended up applying 1 coat of brown mahogany wipe-on toner and 2 coats of brown walnut wipe-on toner, both from We Refinish. On everything else, including the legs, I did 1 coat of brown walnut. I originally had bought these screws and brass screw covers to use to attach the legs to the side of the nightstand, but the screws ended up being too short, so I just ended up doing the 2 screws on the bottom. However, I was really set on having this brass detail on the side of the legs, so at the very last minute, I decided to use them anyway. After that, the last couple of things I had to do were to reattach the legs, rehydrate the drawer, and then add new hardware. Well, that was a complete lie. I also had to reattach the backing. Before I show you what the nightstand looks like now, here is a quick reminder of what it looked like before. And if you want to see more furniture flips, restorations, and the occasional DIY, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. And here's what it looks like now. I have refinished a lot of single mid-century modern nightstands, but I think this one is my absolute favorite. I'm so glad that I decided to make these legs instead of a base because I feel like it brings a fun uniqueness to this nightstand. And I also love that you can actually see the grain now through this stain. So like always, thank you for spending some time with me. I hope you're able to learn something new or get inspired to refinish your own furniture. Be respectful in my comments, and I'll talk to y'all soon.